Hello shepherds in arms and spirit. With spring fast approaching, I thought this would be a good opportunity to bring you along. Today I wanted to prep my lambing grab and go bin and walk you through our lambing process from a dairy and wool producer perspective. What's normal, what preventative measures I have in place to make sure our lambing goes as smoothly as possible, and then after we're done taking stock, let's settle down with preparing a fun sheep-based muffin snack for a quick treat on the go. If you're new to sheep keeping, you may have heard of year-round breeds or seasonal breeds. Starting off, our flock are seasonal breeders. And what that means is that they only come into heat or are receptive to breeding when the days are short and the nights are long. To put it crudely, there's this melatonin signal to the sheep that tells them that now is the ideal time to carry and later on lamb, usually between 142 days through 152 days, or 5 months later. We separated our ram out with his buddy for a short time, and then when the time was right, I reintroduced our ram and marked the calendar our estimated lambing date. Some people like to keep their rams separately, mainly year-round, but for a flock as small as mine, I find it really helps. Not only with the workload, but helps me keep an eye out for the sheep if I run a ram with our girls almost year-round. Since our ram's passed all of our temperament testing and trained to heel, lead, and has very polite manners, having everyone together as this larger unit really helps ease up on all that management workload. I know some folks have rams that are dangerous, and I get it. I've done that too. Especially if you have a rare breed. It's tough sometimes to get that perfect genetics that balance out your flock. You just don't have the genetic options or opportunities that you'd like, and you do what you need to preserve these rare breed genetics. Homestead systems with an aggressive ram is not a beginner situation to handle. If you want to know how to work with rams and how to manage a buddy ram, there's a bit of nuance. And most situations can be worked out, but not in a single soundbite. It's more of a full long-form video, and oftentimes with rams, depending on the situation, it's more of a long-term action plan rather than changing the ram into something he's not. You can't fix him, girl, but there are ways to manage him. Let me know if there's something that you're interested in. So to ensure that the ewes have the highest probability of throwing twins, some shepherds will do what's called flushing. This is basically giving the ewes a gradual increase of high quality feed. This can trigger the ewe's body to produce extra eggs, but with my setup, it doesn't really work. I mainly focus on making sure that our girls are in the best condition going into this harsh winter, and because they are working girls in that I milk them, I don't have much of a problem with obesity, which can complicate lambing issues. Also, some vets offer a sonogram to check for twins and monitor your sheep during pregnancy. I usually just eyeball them, but it can be a good tool for you if you want to dial in your management. If you have a sheep breed that has a tendency towards lambing singletons or has obesity tendencies, it does help to get a good grass hay rather than feeding them for production. Some breeds tend to give people that are new to sheep raising less to worry about during the lambing time period, and it's a good introduction to sheep keeping. So this is where knowing your breed, but also your breeder's goals, really helps in your sheepy setup. Jumping ahead in time, at around 2 months prior to our estimated lambing date, if I haven't stopped milking, I do so now. This is because during the last month or two, our sheep are growing out their lambs the most, and I want to make sure that they pull all their energy where it needs to go to prevent lambing problems. Dairy sheep, ewes that are carrying multiple lambs, as well as very obese and too thin of conditioned ewe, are the most at risk for pregnancy complications. If an ewe doesn't get enough high quality food, your ewe can get pregnancy toxemia or ketosis. Also, if your ewe delivers a large singleton, Feeding too much grain can also cause complications through delivering too large of a lamb for the ewe, holding a yearling over so that it doesn't carry a lamb that's too big for her, or at least waiting to breed your ewe till it's 7 to 8 months old and mostly grown really helps a lot in preventing some of these delivery complications. Also, using a ram that has a history of small birth size or weight ratios but fast growth also helps, but sometimes it can be hard to find these records on these things on a new ram. So in preparation for lambing, I feed my girls a high ration of high quality alfalfa pellets to supplement their hay, which I call diet food, since they tend to lose weight on it. If you live in a more temperate region, you probably won't have the same issues I have. We had a really wet season this year, and the hay quality can be really rough nutritionally, as it degrades in quality, and as the winter draws on, even when it's the best around. So it's important to tailor your sheep's diet to not only your region, but also the sheep breed that you're raising. So I like to fill out my girls' diet with a bit of some all-stock pellets for those extra calories, and free choice sheep mineral to balance things out. Especially with hay stored over a long winter, even if it's barn stored, it tends to lose some of those nutritional value over time. Coming up on their last month of pregnancy, I like to check their worm count through the Famancia score or a fecal count. The parasite load can really wreak a havoc on the ewe at this time, so I like to give them a bit of a boost with a chemical wormer. Also, now it's time to give them their booster shot, like their CT and D shot. When giving the ewes their shots this late in pregnancy, it really helps the lambs too. When they get all that golden colostrum, a bit of the immunity carries over too. The last thing to prep is my grab-and-go bin. I like to have everything sorted and in place so I know where everything is when I need it. Also, since I like to lamb during the early spring when the snow is still on the ground, rather than shear my ewes while pregnant, I like to do what's called crutching the ewe. This involves a sort of hygiene cut, or trimming a little of the wool back off the area around the udder and legs. This really helps in keeping that area clean from matting from the afterbirth or discharge. And in the case of woolly udders, it helps the lambs find those teats. Some folks that lamb late in spring or live in warmer areas may shear their ewes while they're still pregnant. Sheep do get heat stress, and this helps them a lot. The downsides are that the handling may stress out the ewe as well, but it does protect the wool from potential breaks or damage from the stress of lambing or damage from lambs jumping on top of mom. Next up, to prepare our lambing area, I like to use a fresh layer of straw. It's warm, airy, and makes cleaning up all that afterbirth super easy. Also, on the note of wool sheep versus hair sheep, with wool sheep, unlike hair sheep or goats, straw or clean hay that's free of trash or burrs is better than, say, pine shavings or wood pellets, in which the shavings and sawdust will ruin your wool. I want to stress how important it is to keep that wool clean through just little things here or there that really help in the long run. So even though our sheep have choice to lamb anywhere, they really prefer lambing in the shed. It's very secure and a sheltered location, not only from the elements, but from some predators as well. So for the bin, I like to have some colostrum paste on hand. It's shelf stable, or even better, frozen colostrum on hand from one of our oldest and healthiest ewes. It's really important for these lambs to nurse and get some of that thick yellow colostrum. It contains all the antibodies that protect the lamb from infection during the first few weeks of the lamb's life. When reheating the frozen colostrum, it helps to defrost it slowly. We want to preserve those antibodies and not accidentally cook them. This is where the paste is super convenient though. You just grab it and it's there, shelf stable and ready to go. Another thing I like to have on hand is Bose. We used to be able to get the injectable version over the counter, but nowadays the injectable is by prescription only. And even so, it's still super hard to get a whole vial, depending on the vet, and now very costly as well. And an alternative is Bose paste, sold in most feed stores. So if a lamb looks a little weak in the legs, it doesn't take much, just a little dab inside their mouth, and it may give them a little boost if you live in a selenium deficient area. Next up, we have iodine. After a lamb is up on its toes and cleaned off, I like to pour a little bit of iodine in a medicine cup and dip the umbilical cord all the way up to their tummy. It's a preventive measure for navel ill or any sort of infection of their belly button. Now we need to check out the vitamin B vial. If you have an older ewe who's had a rough or long labor, the vitamin B shots really help in giving them a boost of pep. Though technically I've never had to use these, but I like to have it on hand. Some optional things to have inside the grab-and-go bin are leg straps or OB snares. So these are used when there's a difficult labor and you need to go in and untangle or maybe grab a hoof that's stuck back. One loop goes around the hoof, pulling it forward, and it really helps. I've only had to use these once in 15 years. I can't seem to find mine right now. So it's there for rare emergencies. On that note, having some type of lube or anything also helps grease your hands, and some gloves to help prevent uterine infections. They're all good to have on hand, and don't forget emergency numbers of your vet or mentor. Lastly, we have our towels. Ewes do a really good job cleaning up the lambs, but I still like to help things, and sometimes a sheep giving birth to multiples may be so busy birthing they lose track of which lamb they were drying off. So I like to start wiping the lamb down, pulling off any afterbirth from the mouth or nose, and especially wipe off that udder. It's so much easier to clean off now than to wait for it to dry and mess with that during milking. Our flock often lambs when there's still snow on the ground, so I'm more interested in drying them out fast and observing them nursing, and then also clean up all that discharge off the udder. Lastly, I like to have molasses on hand. I like to give the girls a small bin of warm molasses water in something that's tippable so that the newborn lambs won't get hung up on it or drown. Plus, it's a fun treat just for the ewe. I find the sheep really enjoy it. And that about covers it for the grab-and-go bin. Now it's time for the waiting game. As we get closer to lambing, I like to keep an eye and ear on the flock. I'm mainly observing their udder development. Some will develop their udder well in advance, and others not so much. Their udder may look tight or shiny even as they get closer to lambing, almost as if it can't possibly hold any more milk. I'm also looking at what I call their poochie. It gets very swollen, puffy, and floppy. As they near lambing, their body's making sure it's ready. Sometimes there's a little clear discharge, but not to worry if you see any, or if you don't see any at all. Another hint that active labor is coming are that the tendons on either side of the tail start to soften. In hair sheep, it's easier to see and feel, but with the woolly sheep, it takes a bit of practice to feel for it. It helps to check and get familiar with the sheep prior to lambing, so you can compare mentally. But the ligaments almost seem to disappear or feel very soft, and then the tail feels a little bit loose, almost unhinged. Early on, you can feel them and they'll be very hard and almost feel like little pencils on either side of the tail. I know it's rough, but it takes a bit of practice to start feeling for these things. When it's time to lamb, the ewe will separate away from the flock. Sometimes, depending on the weather, they may lamb in a pasture, but more often than not, they'll hang out in a shed or barn and kick the rest of the flock out. So going off to some corner and pawing at the ground in one specific area, this is when they're pretty much in active labor. Often the sheep have a specific or special ball or bleat that the sheep like to use only when they're lambing. It's pretty loud at times, or maybe that's just my girls. If you're lucky, you may catch them actively pushing, bracing themselves against the floor, or legs stretched out. Oftentimes, they get up and down. They may start licking the air or your hands, pawing gently at their tummy. You may even start to see tiny hooves that go in and out with each contraction, and then with the next push, a head or the whole lamb, especially as they stand up, allowing gravity to just help them along once they're on the ground. I like to clear out some of the birthing fluid from their nose at this time and move them closer to the ewe's face if she hasn't turned around by now. But how do you tell if there's still lambs in there? Sometimes you can feel for them, but until the placenta passes, there's a chance there's still lambs in there and on the way. After all her lambs are born, you may see a bloody, fluid-filled bubble hanging out from the ewe's body. It's important to leave it alone. This is the placenta and afterbirth, and it takes anywhere from an hour, ideally, to as much as 12 hours to pass. Once the ewe passes the placenta, some eat them. Mine usually don't, so I like to clean it up and dispose of it very far away and bury just to keep the sheep a little bit safer from the bears. The day after lambing, I like to clean up her udder again. If I missed any parts of the wool that are really messy, it helps to clip some back, but usually a warm sponge bath just helps clean things up. More often than not, I wake up and the first thing in the morning, there's a lamb already on the ground, hopping about, dried off. But what if things go wrong? How do you tell? I've had my run-ins with difficult births over the years. It's rare, but it happens. Lambing should take around an hour or so. During delivery, the lamb should be what's sometimes called a diving position. Both hooves forward with the nose in between its toes. But say if a lamb has one leg back, it can really make for a very slow and hard labor for the ewe. For the inexperienced, it can be incredibly daunting to experience this for the first time. Starting off, if you see your ewe in distress, pushing until she's exhausted or struggling, especially if it goes on for a few hours, it helps to wash up, take off all your rings, watch, or jewelry, put on your gloves and lube, and check your ewe. It's important to move very slowly and carefully to make sure that both feet are in a diving position. When I first started out years ago, I had a flock of mostly rams and also a few pygmies. Back then I was lucky. One pygmy goat, she was very sweet, but also very vocal and clear with her communication. Her kidding was going really slow. Literally no idea what to do, if this was an intervention type of deal or what. She was very vocal and kind of screamed at me with a bit of distress. So washing up, I went in and I felt 3 hooves inside her birth canal at the same time. Normally with twins, one twin comes first, and then the ewe will clean up the lamb and maybe have time to nurse the lamb, and then paw the ground, settle down, and deliver the second lamb. In this situation, she was pretty expressive. I knew she was carrying twins because she was pretty wide. Anyways, it's a pretty tricky situation to be in. But I had to feel around and try to figure out which leg belonged to which kid, and I took my best guess and pushed one of the legs back, hoping it was attached to the right kid, shoving one kid back completely, and then whoosh! The labor progressed right as rain, everything worked itself out, and the twins were born healthy and bouncing. But if you're worried, don't hesitate to call your local vet for a farm visit or your mentor. Sometimes it helps to have someone take you under their wing and calm your fears, and see your ewes and check them out. But it does help to be prepared because sometimes vets aren't able to come to the farm in time, and some situations are an easy fix. Usually involve reorienting the lamb, such as going in and pulling the leg forward, or getting that lamb into that diving position. Though one of the most frustrating lambing experiences are deliveries where the lamb's head or leg is completely back. Each situation takes care, and it's really important to not pull on a stuck lamb. It can tear the ewe, and oftentimes the lamb has to be pushed all the way back in to straighten out their neck or pull the other leg forward, and then to get the heads lined back up. These things can be really difficult. Complicate that with twins or triplet lambs getting tangled inside the womb, and all of them attempting to be born at the same time. You can see why, if you're first starting out, it can be rough and scary at times. Once the lamb is born, often the ewe will turn around, face the lamb, and begin to lick the lamb to clean it off. She may also paw it to get up and to try to get the lamb to orient itself, to nurse. The lambs are born with an instinct to nurse, but don't quite know where to aim. Good ewes will gently encourage their lamb where to nurse, even squat a little, trying to help the lamb up and eating. A bad mother, though, may headbutt or reject the lamb. Sometimes if the lambing was rough, or maybe it's a first-timer, they may be confused, disoriented, or maybe they just need a little help in making sure the lamb is able to nurse the right area. In these situations, it may be helpful to hold the ewe still with an assistant, a halter, or a stand, so the lamb can nurse and then she can see how the lamb is hers. On that note, sometimes, especially if an ewe deliver a singleton, the lambs have a preference for which side to nurse. It can be anything from the waxy plug being a little too stubborn for the lamb to suckle off, or one side has a higher flow rate or lower and the lamb is just a lefty, or whatever the reason. I've seen this in twins as well. I like to hang back and milk out that plug that blocks the flow of colostrum that protects the udder from infection, and make sure that the lamb is getting enough colostrum, as well as gather some extra colostrum for spare situations. It's recommended that lambs nurse at least 200 milliliters of colostrum in their first 2 hours. That can be really hard to see how much they're drinking, but usually a lamb will be up and trying to nurse within the first hour of birth. Also, if the lamb only nurses one side, it causes a sort of lopsided udder, where first one side is empty and nursed out, and the other side is full. And so with time, when the other half of the udder is full and untouched, and if the lamb continues to prefer to nurse just the one side out, the udder will slowly decrease its milk supply and dry up that side. This is bad for the health of the udder and impacts milk production for the next year as well. So to fix this problem, I like to make sure the lamb is not only getting colostrum, but actively nursing both sides. Also with lambs, a lot of people think that tail wagging means it's nursing, but I found that not to be a reliable sign of them getting enough colostrum. Sometimes there is a plug on the teat that I told you about earlier, and they'll work at it for a bit and wag their tail. Maybe they'll work it loose or not, but their tails will wag nonetheless. That first milk the ewe produces is called colostrum. It's super nutritious, yellow and thick. It contains all the antibodies to protect the lamb from an infection during the first part of its life. So it's really important that the lamb drinks as much colostrum as possible during the first 24 hours of life. The newborn lambs will suck frequently and often nursing about 1 to 2 times or more per hour, and for several minutes each time. But by the end of their first month, they may only be suckling about once every 2 hours. Oftentimes our sheep produce more than enough milk for not only their lambs, but extra for others as well. The little lambs just can't seem to keep up with the production, which is a good thing for dairy sheep. I milk the ewes out twice a day without separating the lamb from the ewe. When you're milking, usually the colostrum is that thick yellow texture, and as the weeks go by, slowly more of that milk that we're really after starts to flow, diluting the color of the milk from yellow to finally white. I usually give it about 2 weeks before I start calling it full-on milk. I know of people who do use colostrum for stuff. There's even some old recipes using colostrum for cheese, but I think that's more of a situation for people who are eating their own boots. But I've never made colostrum cheese, so when freezing colostrum for lambs, it helps to double bag the Ziploc baggies. They tend to bust while freezing. Label them with the name of the ewe and the date, and then when de-thawing them, make sure you do it slowly and on a low heat so not to destroy the antibodies. Moving on, how do you tell if a lamb's getting enough milk? After they're done drinking, their belly should be round and firm. If their belly feels soft or sunken, they may not be getting enough milk. Also, if you see the lamb hunching, shivering, or just looking plain miserable, it's a sign that there's something amiss. I want to see them popping about when they're active and nursing multiple times an hour. And when they're relaxed, calm, and not shivering or looking miserable. Usually the ewes will make sure to give time for the lambs to nurse at this age, standing still, even squatting and nuzzling and encouraging the lamb. But if your ewe is refusing to stand still for the lambs, sometimes it helps to load the ewes up on the stand, give them some snacks where the lamb nurses, and check up on their udder to see if there's something amiss. Let's start baking while we continue to discuss lambing. This is a recipe I've adapted from a combination of King Arthur recipes. This is a sheep's milk based buttermilk, but any animal based buttermilk will suffice. It's quite thick and can be watered down. Also, you can use yogurt if you don't have buttermilk. And if you don't know how to make yogurt or buttermilk, you can check out one of my other videos. I'll link up here on how to make your own cultured buttermilk or my video on sheepy yogurt. The butter is also sheep's milk based, so on that, one of the goals I have for our homestead is to ultimately produce about 80% of our food. It can take years to set this up, but I feel that it's not only rewarding emotionally and saves us money, but it also helps feeling a deeper connection to like our ancestors, what they experienced, but also connecting to our animals and nature. It's definitely stressful to aim for all that high number right off the bat, so remember, any amount of food though that you produce is a win. It's all about baby steps, even if it's a patio garden or a potted garden. It's important to be proud of your harvest, and each step is a step forward. So let's preheat our oven. Here's a quick tip to save you some money. I like to grease my pan with a little bit of oil instead of using muffin liners. I haven't bought them in years, so this really saves me some money, but also it reduces the amount of trash we produce, which helps when you have to go and take everything over to the dump. I'll add the recipe to your screen and put it in the description. For your convenience, we're going to make our cinnamon streusel topping in a small bowl. Mix together all of our ingredients till turn crumbly and then set aside. Here I'm weighing my softened sheep's butter. Just because I didn't shape them to the industry standard, I like to make butter when I can and freeze it in batches to use later, or even better, can or clarify the butter for a shelf-stable alternative. Let's mix together all our main dry ingredients, including our homemade granola. Even though you may find it odd, I find it gives the muffins a really nice, chewy texture. So let's toss in the rest of our ingredients. This recipe calls for brown sugar, or for a fun alternative, I like to substitute white sugar with 2 tablespoons of molasses. In a separate bowl, we're going to add our wets, vanilla, molasses, oil, and our sheepy buttermilk. Stir it together well. Let's combine them together by pouring our liquid ingredients into our dry ingredients, stirring just enough to combine so we don't end up over mixing our batter. Then we'll lightly spoon our batter into our prepared muffin pan until they're slightly full, and sprinkle generously some of the topping, pressing it into the tops of each muffin. Bake the muffins 20 to 25 minutes until the tops are a nice golden brown and a toothpick or fork in the center comes out clean. Remove the muffins from the oven and cool for about 5 minutes in the pan. Then we can pop them out from their pan and serve them as is or glaze them. To make the glaze, let's grab a small bowl and mix up all our glaze ingredients until they're nice and smooth. And then drizzle this on top of our cold muffins. I like to have them on the counter so it's a healthy-ish, quick treat. So let's talk about the heavier aspects of lambing season. Sometimes, even with the best preparations and preventive care, something goes sideways. Sometimes the ewe has a health problem or an infection that can cause the ewe to abort the lambs or give birth to a weak lamb. Perhaps there's a snowstorm or your ewe lambed and then walked off, and here you are with a cold or unconscious lamb. I know some folks recommend tubing the lamb in these situations, but here's why I don't. Tubing the lamb involves slowly guiding the feeding tube down the throat and into the stomach. Then we add our pre-warmed colostrum or milk into the tummy. This can be a great way to not only warm the lamb, but feed it and not ruin its sucking reflex with the bottle, as bottles require a different sucking motion than with the udder, and it may cause the ewe to correct the lamb for being rough. But the downsides are that you may accidentally fill their lungs with milk instead. Also, if the lamb's too cold, the rumen isn't functioning properly, and there can be problems with that as well. I've had good success with a hot water bath, even with an unconscious lamb. Some folks stick them in a bag and submerge their body, not head or nose, in the water. This keeps them dry while warming them up. I like to line the sink with a towel, just to make sure it's more comfortable for the lamb, and hold the lamb in the sink so it doesn't slide down into the water too deep. Once they warm up, they wake up and they're hungry and ready to nurse or feed on the bottle. So let's say something further dramatic has happened or unexpected, and you have to bottle feed your lamb. Sometimes you can graft lambs onto another ewe. This is where it helps to have a milking stand for this type of thing, and some people have ewes that will accept any lamb as their own. Involves a lamb nursing from the ewe while she's on a stand eating her treats, or tethered with a halter. This nurse ewe won't go out of her way to care for the orphan lamb, but you can feed them from the ewe just with help. If you choose to bottle feed your lambs, they sell milk replacer in powder form in the feed stores. There are instructions on the bag how to use their formula. If you vaccinated your ewes and have some colostrum, it's really important to feed this to your lambs to prevent overeating disease as well as other problems. As I said earlier, the lambs need around 200 milliliters of colostrum within their first 24 hours. I've picked up livestock who I never was sure if they ever got colostrum. A lot of people hate bottle feeding. It's a big time commitment. It's a good way to pick up cheaper livestock to get started, but there's some problems with it too. A lot of people hate bottle feeding because it's a big time commitment and it's not very work friendly for some places. It helps to have a large dog crate. I like to use towels to line them and just do like a lot of laundry. Others like to use pee-pee pads or some type of dog potty training material. And when the lambs are hopping about the house, I like to put a regular diaper on them for human babies, cut a hole in the butt of the diaper to slide that tail through, and for the boys, I'd wrap an extra diaper around their bean. So 2 diapers for the boys or wethers, and 1 diaper for the ewes or girls. I've found that our livestock, whether lamb, goat, or pig, do better with a mix of milk replacer and whole milk. We want our lambs peeing and pooping often. If you want to bottle feed a ram, I really recommend weathering it as soon as possible. Rams learn a lot of manners from their mama, and it is dangerous to have a bottle-fed lamb that doesn't understand that humans are not sheep, nor built like a sheep. For bottles, I really recommend lamb nipples. Some slide onto bottles, and others screw onto the bottle. The slide type ones are soft and easy for the lamb to nurse, but they tend to break down with time, and the lambs can be so rough as to rip the nipple off of the bottle and pouring milk everywhere. This is where the screw on nipple works really well, and it's secure, but some lambs hate that tip, so I like to keep a couple on hand for emergencies. When encouraging the lamb to bottle feed, it helps to make your hands into a funnel shape at first and coax that nipple into the lamb's mouth. Lambs that are used to nursing off of their dam or the ewe tend to be the hardest to transition to a bottle. It's doable, but it can be rough. Sometimes it may also help to transition them to a pan of milk, depending on how old they are. Bottle babies can be super adorable. It's a lot of work, but just in case you're worried that you need to have a bottle baby for a kind and lovable sheep, temperament is really breed and sheep specific. Some people avoid bottle babies because they're really all up in your grill, which can make chores difficult. But I've found it doesn't matter if the sheep's bottle fed or not. It's more about handling, temperament, and genetics. Even older ewes can warm up to you and bond really well. It may just be a longer process to develop that trust, and then training to desensitize them or familiarize them to new things. It helps to get your seed stock from a breeder who has a healthy stock, who breeds for good mothering ability, as well as ease of lambing. Even so, unfortunately, lambing issues can and do happen. But with good management skill and preventative care, we can really reduce the amount of issues that may arise. If you made it this far, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful lambing experience. If you're ever in blue sky, don't forget to stop by and say hello. I love seeing all your sheepy pictures. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave me a baby emoji in the comments below. Until next time, stay soft, stay warm, and stay true to you.